On Wednesday, Russia's President Vladimir Putin claimed that Ukraine was planning to use a so-called dirty bomb, a claim that his underlings had been peddling for days. The accusations were roundly denounced by Ukraine and its Western allies. They say this rhetoric is nothing more than a Russian attempt to ratchet up tensions and escalate the conflict. So how far will Putin go to turn the tide of a war that has not gone his way? Joining me now is Boris Bondarev, who spent 20 years as a Russian official. He was a diplomat based at the United Nations in Geneva before resigning in May over the war in Ukraine. He is one of the highest level officials to publicly defect over the war, and he joins us now from Switzerland. Welcome, Boris. I want to start by asking you to describe why you think Russia's decision-making apparatus got to the point it did in the invasion of Ukraine, because you have this fascinating foreign affairs essay where you lay out really how Russia has evolved as a kind of ruling elite in Russia has gotten narrower, more and more insulated, more and more kind of divorced from the outside world. What do you think, what happened that got us to where we are?
First of all, it is the result or outcome of this evolution of the Russian state, which we have witnessed for the last 20 years and even longer. It has been getting more and more isolated from society. And this is very dangerous because people who work in the government, they get this misinformation from their colleagues, and they make their decision based on this miscalculation and misinformation. And we see it as a result of it. We see it as in this invasion in Ukraine.
In the kind of decision-making structure you're describing, Boris, I assume bad news does not travel up the chain. In other words, people are not likely to tell Putin, Mr. President, the war is going badly, the idea of trying to take Kyiv was bad. All that kind of thing probably doesn't go up the chain as much as one would hope it would.
I believe it is very close to truth. And I also believe that when you report some information high to the high command, or to the leadership of the country, you have, in Russia today, you have to make it as pleasant as possible. And of course, you don't want to displease or upset your bosses and the government itself, because it would jeopardize your career prospects.
So when we hear this talk about a dirty bomb, first by Putin's aides, Lavrov, now Putin himself, what do you think is going on inside? Is this, are they feeling a certain pressure and coming up with new threats?
I think that today Russian leadership is actually at a loss. They're trying to adjust themselves or accommodate themselves to this new reality. And the reality says that Russia may well lose this war. And it looks quite chaotic, really, because there is no strategy under this. It is only some kind of random ways of looking for some opportunities to get themselves out of this very peculiar, very dangerous situation.
What about the threat of a nuclear weapon being used? In your career as a diplomat, have you ever heard of the Russian top leadership talking about the possible use of a tactical nuclear weapon? Do you think Putin is bluffing, or is this real?
I don't think that these nuclear weapons threats are very real for now. And I think that they will not be real if Putin gets a very clear signal from the international community that any use of nuclear weapons will have the most gravest consequences for Russia and for him personally.
And what about negotiations? So imagine what you described as if Putin feels like he's losing and that fear continues, he could end up using a tactical nuclear weapon. What if the battlefield ends up, in a stalemate? Let's say the Ukrainians take more territory, Kherson, maybe Kharkiv, but then it bogs down. At that point, could you imagine Putin being willing to arrive at some kind of negotiated settlement, which would be a compromise for everyone?
All the parties have absolutely different and antagonizing priorities and goals in these negotiations. So for now, I don't see any prospects for any real negotiation.
So if what you say is true and we are in for just a long, protracted war, what happens inside Russia? Does Putin's hold on Russia so strong that even a long war, even maybe more mobilization, would not weaken it?
First, I don't think that Putin is really ready for a long, protracted war. I think that his strength, his regime is a little bit overestimated now. And now we see in Russia that there is a lot of confusion in the conduct of mobilization, for instance. And there is some kind of unrest and the discontent within the population. So I believe that Ukraine may not go on this path of long and protracted war, but they are capable, Ukrainian army is capable of defeating Russian troops and of liberating their own lands. But for that, they need continued and enhanced assistance and support from the West. So with that, I believe they can win this war in quite a short term, maybe in a few months. So because they have already shown very significant progress in this.
Boris, fascinating insights. We really appreciate you coming on. Very, very useful.